The former world military force, the Russian military, will be discussed today. After Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, many were surprised by its military setback. Russia was expected to immediately dominate with its large military and plentiful resources. However, Ukraine resisted the Russian troops and hindered its strategic ambitions. The real reasons for this ineffectiveness? Is the Russian army the strongest? Russia's army has long been considered as one of the world's strongest. Why is it so weak? After all, the statistics show a nation that could destroy practically any nation. Russia ranks second in the world according to Global Firepower, which ranks countries by military strength annually. The military is so massive that most nations should envy it, trailing only the U.S. and ahead of China. Just check the numbers. Russia has 1.32 million active military personnel and 2 million reserves, not to mention 25,000-member paramilitary groups like the Wagner Group. Conscription, which Russia has begun since the Ukraine war, gives them 46.4 million more individuals to enlist. It boasts the world's second strongest air force on the surface. GFP inventories 42 Fight-5 aircraft, 2,766 of which are combat-ready. Russia's air force is only surpassed by the U.S. in raw numbers, but Russia has repeatedly failed to use its aviation supremacy in Ukraine. More later. Focus on Russia's ground forces for now. The Russian arsenal has 14,777 tanks, the most in the world, and 16 130-82 vehicles. It stocks 30 multiple launch rocket systems and the most towed and self-propelled artillery in the world. It also has a navy, world's largest on paper, with 781 assets. It leads with 65 submarines and 83 corvettes. Mine warfare is also strong in Russia with 47 vessels. Ukraine shouldn't have survived. If Russia is as strong as it seems on paper, its ground troops should have steamrolled over Ukraine with an air force that would make it tough for Ukraine's ground forces to fight back. Russia's navy should have held the Black Sea to transfer additional troops into Ukraine and strike its beaches. None of this happened. At the time of this video, Russia was mired in a 2-year conflict. Its Black Sea Navy was defeated, its air force failed to dominate Ukraine, and its ground troops, though they've progressively gained territory, have suffered tremendous losses that some reports estimate at 500,000 people. Deception of Russian might. In summary, Russia has been exposed as a paper tiger, a military that appears strong but is weaker in conflict. This leads us to this video's main question: why is Russia so weak? Russia's strength deception stems from military and leadership corruption. Politico examined Russia's slow takeover of Ukraine in March 2022 and the consequences of corruption on Russian forces. It noted that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner military group's late key benefactor who died in a mysterious jet crash in 2023, was connected to several of the companies that create these rations, and that some soldiers had received expired rations from 2015. The insinuation was that Prigozhin was pocketing Russia's government money. When campaigning against Putin, former Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny claimed that Prigozhin's enterprises operated a cartel that gamed the Russian bidding system to win hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts. Very little of that money would go to feeding and equipping Russia's troops. Navalny was imprisoned for embezzlement in 2021. He was found in an Arctic Circle prison 3 weeks after disappearing from his cell 18 months later. In February 2024, he died. Many Western governments blame Russia for his death. Politico reports that Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine was hampered by fuel shortages. Corruption. Russia is the world's third largest oil producer despite Western sanctions after the Ukraine war. Yet, it couldn't supply its men with gasoline to fulfill their task. Embezzlement may have been involved. Russian military officials often call fuel their second currency, meaning that they know fuel is often stolen from the military. These are some examples. Russia's corruption worsens. Russia was ranked D by Transparency International and its Government Defense Integrity Index in 2020. Due to a lack of external scrutiny on budgets, programs, and the activities of military supporting organizations, corruption is likely. In real life, mice frolic when the cat is away. Only in this situation does the Russian state cat ignore its many military mice, allowing them to significantly weaken the military. According to Action on Armed Violence, Russia's military reflects its social order with kickbacks and embezzlement. Corrupt, cruel, rigid. A trifecta of concerns makes the rich richer while continuously watching their backs, while those in Ukraine face situations that shouldn't impact a modern military. Corruption isn't Russia's sole military issue. The Kremlin ordered the invasion of Ukraine, not the military. Kremlin Speak. The Kremlin, distinct from the military, was responsible for planning the Ukraine operation, which led to significant issues. Corruption within both the Kremlin and military, along with fear of losing positions, resulted in a flawed understanding of Russia's military strength. This lack of communication caused logistical failures, such as the deployment of Russia's National Guard, Roskvardaya, at the war's start with insufficient gear, soldiers armed only with shields, batons, and helmets, ill-prepared for combat in Kiev. The Kremlin also misjudged the logistics of the invasion. Russian troops quickly ran out of equipment and ammo, hindering their ability to conquer or maintain territory. A November 2023 report revealed soldiers endured poor conditions, living in the mud, unable to light fires, and lacking proper food. This failure to provide adequate supplies, compounded by corruption, highlights the Kremlin's poor planning and reliance on obsolete Soviet equipment in its attacks. Aging Soviet-era equipment. In February 2022, Russia's best-trained soldiers, equipped with the latest technology, invaded Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainians relied on Soviet-era equipment until global support arrived. By summer 2022, Russia began deploying older tanks like the T-62, T-54, and T-55, some dating back to 1946. Russia moved 40% of its Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles from Barakia to Ukraine, and in some cases, older tanks were used as kamikazes. The use of antiquated equipment reflects Russia's loss of modern artillery and tanks, such as the T-72s equipped with Sosna-U thermal imaging at the war's start. As the conflict continued, Russia employed older, less precise weaponry, including 1940s howitzers and 1950s naval guns. These outdated systems, while still functional, highlight the lack of modernization in Russia's military. If Russia had superior modern weapons, it could likely defeat Ukraine. This convergence of poor planning, corruption, and obsolete equipment weakens Russia's military capability. Poor Russian logistics and planning. Russia's logistics and preparation issues have led to dire conditions on the front lines. The strategy of deploying untrained or drafted soldiers in waves seems designed to overwhelm Ukraine with poorly trained forces as cannon fodder. Forbes reported in September 2022 that Russia's draft of unprepared soldiers amounted to planned murder, following an earlier claim that 300,000 soldiers would be enlisted without proper training. Putin's draft aimed to increase the military to 1.4 million, but protests erupted after a ban on ticket sales to men aged 18 to 60. The lack of training for these draftees is a major concern, with most receiving only brief instruction and being sent directly to the front lines, often under the guidance of inexperienced soldiers. This method destabilizes frontline units and can be disastrous in a conflict like Ukraine. Frontline Russian troops are struggling with insufficient supplies, equipment, and training. Many soldiers are new draftees, often trained for only a few days before deployment. The absence of experienced veterans and lack of proper training make these troops poorly prepared, and logistical issues and corruption further hinder their readiness. According to the Institute for the Study of War, draftees with minimal training are unlikely to be effective reinforcements. A recent draftee reported having received only 1 or 2 days of training before being sent to Ukraine. Additionally, many Russian soldiers are unwell, with reports of tuberculosis and HIV among frontline troops, further weakening their effectiveness. This reflects a broader issue: Russia's willingness to sacrifice soldiers in its push for territorial gains. The Kremlin appears indifferent to the human cost, sending untrained, ill soldiers into battle, which damages morale. Reports from March 2022 highlighted widespread reluctance among Russian troops, with many soldiers fleeing or looting, and some unaware of their mission's purpose. Morale problems are compounded by a lack of motivation among Russian soldiers, who are treated as expendable. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers fight with high morale, driven by national pride. The Kremlin's centralized decision-making, with few decisions made outside Putin's inner circle, exacerbates these issues, as it hinders effective communication and military planning, leading to poor performance on the battlefield. Russian military weakness. The Russian military is weakened by poor leadership at the NCO level, where officers lack authority and are merely intermediaries between soldiers and higher-ups. Orders from the Kremlin, which may not fully understand frontline realities, hinder flexibility and adaptation to changing circumstances. Information flow is restricted, which exacerbates the issue, especially in terms of coordination and tactical decision-making. This poor organization is evident in Russia's failure to secure air superiority over Ukraine despite having thousands of aviation assets compared to Ukraine's 320, of which only 177 are combat-ready. Russia's Air Force, the VVS, has struggled due to ineffective coordination with ground troops and inadequate pilot training, reflecting lessons not learned since World War II. Lieutenant General Scott Kinsvater cites a lack of coordination between air and ground forces, compounded by leadership failure to acknowledge the VVS's decline despite new investments. Corruption and poor tactics contribute to Russia's military underperformance, with its inability to capitalize on aerial support for ground troops further exposing its weaknesses. This dysfunction leads to erratic behavior, as seen when Russian jets provoked U.S. drones in 2023, attempting to project strength despite their real vulnerabilities. Russia's military, though weaker than expected, is still capable of some successes, as demonstrated by minor gains in Kharkiv. However, its failure to decisively defeat Ukraine early in the conflict exposes the gap between its perceived and actual military power. Russia appears to be maintaining its status while asserting its strength. Meanwhile, militaries worldwide are learning more about Russian military capability. Your thoughts on the Russian military? Does a military stronger than Ukraine defeat it like a paper tiger? Is Russia restrained, only displaying power when threatened? Thanks for viewing and leaving comments.